Okay, right, today I wanted to show you how to make cereal bars. First was some of the various grains and flakes that are on the market, because you don't need to use just porridge oats with these. There's a whole range of different ones which all have sort of different nutritive values that you can use instead. And I've divided these up into two groups. These three here all contain certain amounts of gluten, not as much as wheat does, but they do contain gluten. So if you're making this for somebody who is a celiac or gluten intolerant, then obviously you would miss out these three. And that includes jumbo oats, which are sort of slightly larger porridge oats, barley flakes, rye flakes, which I haven't got here but are very similar to barley flakes, and the third one is just ordinary porridge oats. As I said, I've kept those three separate. Now, the ones that don't contain any gluten are ones which you may be or may not be familiar with. And the first one here are buckwheat flakes. Actually, is a member of the rhubarb family. But the flakes work extremely well in flapjack type recipes and mueslis. It's completely gluten-free, and you can also buy it as a flour and use it instead of other flours in cooking as well. This one here are brown rice flakes, which I don't tend to use very much in this recipe. So if I do, I use it as a very small quantity. Otherwise, I find if you use a high amount of this in a recipe, you end up with a flavour a bit like the sort of polystyrene of sort of rice cakes, which is not my particular favourite texture. Third one here are millet flakes. And again, gluten-free, slightly more yellowy in colour than the others, but again, it's a very good recipe grain to use in this particular recipe. Now the fourth one is called quinoa. It's spelt Q-U-I-N-O-A, which you think would be pronounced quinoa, but it's actually pronounced quinoa. And you can buy it as a flake. You can also buy it in a flour form, and you can also buy it in little granules in the seeds that it comes in, which could be cooked exactly like rice and used in exactly the same way as you would use rice. I quite like it when I've cooked it for about 15 minutes, and then you can mix it in with grated beetroot and a French dressing, or you can work it like a taboulet and add lots of parsley and mint to it in the French dressing. But quinoa is a very special grain. It's actually classed as a fruit, and it comes from Peru, like Paddington Bear. And its protein content is much, much higher than any of the other grains. It's almost equivalent to eggs. So it's a very good source of adding protein to the diet. So I do use it quite a lot in grain and as a flour and in its natural seed form as well. Right, now cereal bars. In the bowl here I've got 100 grams of softened butter. You don't want to use it straight from the fridge, otherwise it's impossible to try and mix all the ingredients together. If you wanted to use a dairy-free spread, for those who are avoiding dairy in their diet, then you could use that. And I have used half butter and half of a mild olive oil before now, and that's worked equally successfully as well. So there's 100 grams of butter, and then in here I've got 75 grams, which is the only amount of sugar that's going into the recipe, of dark molasses sugar, or you could use muscovado sugar as well. You do need to watch this, because if you've had the packet open for any length of time, then it does tend to dry out and it forms little hard lumps. And if you're not careful and you mix it into ingredients, you get these sort of little hard balls of the sugar, unmixed into the mixture. If it does get somewhat hard, then you can warm it up in a low oven or a gentle microwave, just to try and get rid of the lumps in the sugar. Sometimes even when you bought it from the supermarket, what I always do is give the packets a squeeze. And if they feel nice and soft inside, then I'll buy it. If it feels rock hard, then I leave it on the shelf. So that's 75 grams of the dark muscovado sugar in here, and then mix that in with a wooden spoon. Now you might need to sort of squash it against the side of the bowl to try and incorporate the sugar into the butter. And also if there are any little lumps of the sugar, then you can sort of squash them out against the side as well. You're not trying to beat air into this mixture as if you would make a Victoria sandwich. You're just trying to make the ingredients amalgamate together. That's now creamed together, and you can then add all your other ingredients. Now in here I've got a mixture of 3 different grains which I'm going to use in this recipe, but as I said before, you can change and adapt these to whatever you've got in the food cupboard. I've got 75 grams of porridge oats, 50 grams of buckwheat flakes, and 50 grams of quinoa flakes. So you've got 175 grams of flakes altogether, and that goes into the bowl. Other extras I'm going to add to this is 50 grams of desiccated coconut. And then I've got some seeds, which I'm also going to add to this. I'm going to add a tablespoon of all of these seeds into here. Now, the advantage of using grains and seeds is that you're using it in its seed form, and it contains lots of nutrients in that seed, ready for the plant to germinate and grow before it starts to develop leaves and grow roots, so it can get its own nutrients, you know, from the soil. So if we use seeds in their natural state, then we can use all those natural nutrients that are in the seeds as well. So I'm going to add a tablespoon of each of these. I've got sunflower seeds, pumpkin seeds, and golden linseeds. I do tend to use organic with the seeds as much as I possibly can, simply because, you know, the smaller the grain that you're using, and the bigger its surface area, and the more it absorbs pesticides and herbicides. So if you use it in its organic form, then you've got, you know, a much lower density of pesticides that are allowed to be added, you know, to the actual plant. And then you've got a choice of flavours. Now I'm going to use some chopped chocolate and some raisins, but you could use any dried fruit or nuts in with this as well. You want to put a total of about 125 grams altogether. I've got 50 grams of raisins and 75 grams of chocolate, which I've already previously chopped up. You can use chocolate chips if you wanted to, but personally I find that a lot of the chocolate chips that are on the market, you know, aren't always a very good quality chocolate, so I tend to avoid those and usually buy you know, good quality dark chocolate that's got at least 70% cocoa solids, and use that and just chop it up beforehand. And then to this I'm going to add 2 eggs, which will help to bind the ingredients together. And then just mix those in with a wooden spoon until it's well mixed together. It really is as easy as that. Then what you can then do is find yourself a tin. I prefer to line this completely with silicone paper because it makes it much easier to get it out of the tin. The tin I'm using is a shallow one. It's about 23 centimetres square, but you could use, you know, a rectangular one if you wanted to, so it was about sort of 20 by 30 would be absolutely fine. Now to line it with the silicone paper, what you'll need to do is just to crease it into the bottom corners, take the paper out and just make a diagonal cut into each corner, and then by doing that the paper lies quite neatly in the tin because the edges all fold over each other. And then you add the mixture into the tin. Try not to tip it all over the table. And then just smooth it down so it goes into the corners. Don't worry if it's not completely flat, because when it gets into the oven then the mixture is going to melt and it'll find its own level. Right, so once you've smoothed it down into the tin, then that goes into an oven at 180 degrees centigrade, which is gas mark 4, on a medium shelf, not too high in the oven, otherwise it will brown too quickly, and it will take somewhere around sort of 30-35 minutes. If you check it, you know, around about 25 minutes and see how it's browning, and then, you know, it should be a nice golden brown when it comes out of the oven. Voila!